everyone. Welcome to The Composer's Life. I'm Nadia, your host, and today we have an incredible guest on the podcast. He was captivated by music from an early age, leading him to study and pursue a lifelong career in composing. His orchestral works have been commissioned and performed by multiple symphony orchestras, including American Composers Orchestra in New York City and Pilsen Philharmonic in Czech Republic. He's also had many conductors conduct his works with these orchestras, including Zdenek Macal, Jesus Lopez-Cobos, and Eiji Oue. He's received prestigious grants and fellowships, including the Guggenheim Fellowship, and recently had his opera The Tin Angel performed in New York last November. Please welcome Daniel Asia. So Daniel, where are you from? And can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay, I'm from Seattle, Washington originally. That's where I grew up. And that was back in the 50s and 60s. I was born in 1953. So back then, Seattle was a one company town called Boeing, which makes those big things that everybody flies on all around the world.
Oh, cool. I did
And
not know that was from Seattle.
there you go. All of those Boeing jets started in Seattle, Washington. And let's see, I grew up in a nice Jewish family. My father was a lawyer. My mother was a lawyer. My sister became a lawyer. My brother in law is a lawyer. My uncle's a lawyer. And now my son's a lawyer. Well,
Wow.
uh, yeah, yeah. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up, let's see, like most kids, I started playing the trombone when I was 9 years old. Why the trombone? Because I went in to see the teacher in third grade and I said, I'd like to play the clarinet. And she said, you have two protruding front teeth. It would be hard to create the embouchure on a clarinet.
Hmm.
Would you like to try something else, like the trombone? And I said, okay, I'll try the trombone.
Wow.
So now, whether that was true or whether she just needed somebody to play the trombone, I still don't know to this day. But I started playing and I loved it. And I practiced a lot. And I played in whatever was there at the school, the band and the orchestra. And I ended up, I think, taking private lessons. And I loved it. And I worked really hard. And one day I was playing some popular tune that I just couldn't play because it had seventh position in it. And I cried for 2 or 3 hours trying to get this damn passage.
Oh,
And damn it, if I didn't get it by the end of the 3 or 4 hours. And at the end of that, my mother thought to herself, I don't know. This kid might be serious about this stuff.
that is a good sign. I think we've all
Yeah,
been there as musicians
yeah,
crying
as
over
musicians,
practicing.
right?
Yeah.
Practicing.
Hmm.
Anyway, I ended up going to junior high. That was a good thing, and played in the band and orchestra there, and played chamber music, and got to know Gabrielli and Petzel, and then I went to a nice a private school called the Lakeside School, where I had a wonderful teacher, and he was just getting into the early music movement. He was one of the leaders of it. So I learned to play the recorder family. And then I had a private teacher in trombone, and he said, you should learn to double on trumpet. So I learned to double on trumpet. And then I learned to play classical guitar and did that for about 4 years.
Oh, wow. So did you
And yeah,
ever get around to actually learning clarinet
no,
during
never
any of
did.
that time? Wow.
That's the perfect question. I'm sorry. That was because I almost got to that, but you preceded me. You got there
Oh,
before me.
no.
Anyway, um, at a certain point, yeah, I needed to get braces to play to rectify the problem of the protruding teeth. I had trouble with that word for some reason.
Hmm.
And in any event, so my teacher said, "Look." I'd been playing in the brass choir. That was all we had at this school. And he said, I'll start playing trumpet again, and why don't you conduct? So that was my first experience looking at the score, actually,
Oh,
and
really?
seeing how all this stuff was put together. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there were about four or five of us who were really excited about this music stuff. So he said one day, "Well, would you guys like me to teach you, a year of theory?" And we all started panting and said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that would be great."
Did he mean teach you theory for a year or teach you a year's worth of theory?
Teach us a year's worth of theory in a year.
Okay.
And we loved it. So he gave us his first year of theory, which he'd received from a wonderful professor at Amherst College.
Hmm.
And so then he gave us his second year, and I had to take physics along with that. I didn't do so well in physics, but I managed. But I got
Yeah.
the second year of theory, and that's when I also started really writing more seriously. I sort of got into this thing, and I also played in the Seattle Youth Symphony on trombone, but I only did it for a semester because I got tired of counting 424 measures and then getting yelled at playing in B major. I mean, trombone's not a B major is not a great key for the trombone, particularly when you don't have a trigger.
Yeah, that's not nice.
No, it's not nice at all. Anyway, and for 2 years, I also studied jazz theory with a wonderful guy. Both of these teachers, Peter Siebert and Jerry Gray, were really, you'll excuse me, instrumental in my development as a musician and as a composer. It was really wonderful.
Yeah.
And then I got offered to play in a blood, sweat, and tears rip-off band and go on tour. And I decided not to.
Was this after high school or?
Yeah, it was after high school. They were going to go on tour to California. They needed a new trombone player. I studied in a jazz camp that summer, and they heard me at the end, and they said, "Hey, that was cool. You want to join us?" And so I had to make the decision to go on the road at 18 or to go to college.
Wow, big
Yeah,
choice at that time.
big, big choice, big choice. And I decided to go to college.
So you mentioned, and I want to go back just a little bit. You mentioned that you started writing more seriously when you were starting to learn music theory. So I kind of wanted to go back. At what point did you actually start kind of composing and writing your own stuff?
Then,
Mm,
so kind of, I think when I was 17.
hmm.
Now, this morning I was driving in my car, and Mozart had just finished his first group of string quartets when he was 17.
Right.
So let's put that all in perspective, and for all of us, and for all of
Mhm.
it. Probably we're not Mozart, probably we're not Bach. We didn't start when we were 5 or 6. So that's just the way it is. That's the way it is.
What drew you to actually start writing, though?
Ah, You know, isn't that a great question? What starts any composer? It was like I was doing these exercises, and then I thought, well, yeah, and what if I do this? Ooh,
Hmm,
and what if I try this? And yeah, that's what Delasso would do, and that's what Bach would do. But what would I do there to hear something that I'd like to hear?
hmm,
Right? Isn't that why we all become composers? Because all of a sudden you want to hear what you want to hear that nobody's done yet?
definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah. So you're 18, deciding if you're going to go to college.
So I'm 18 and I go off to this crazy place. My teacher who'd gone to Amherst said, there's this new school starting called Hampshire College, and it's pretty weird, pretty funky, and it's right near Amherst and Smith and Holyoke and University of Massachusetts. And I know you wouldn't like Amherst. That's way too straight laced for you. I was a leftist renegade. And he said, "Why don't you check it out?" Well, I got off the waiting list, so I ended up going to Hampshire,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, I really know I love music, but I think I should spend at least a while not doing music and seeing if there's other stuff I might love to do. So I tried to do that, and after a month, I gave it up.
Really?
Yeah, gave that up.
That's a good amount of time to know exactly what you want to do.
And it took a month, and I went and talked to the composer. His name was Randall McClellan. He said, "Do you want to write music, huh?" I said, "Yeah, I really do. I really do." He said, "Okay." I said, "So here's your first assignment. Go write a piece and start with one note or two notes, but don't use any more than that until you need a third note, and then see what happens." So I went back and I spent a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or something. And there was an oboe student there, so I wrote a piece for oboe.
Mm.
And I didn't know what to call a piece of music then. I looked at it and I said, "Well, it's not a sonata, it's not a bourrée, it certainly isn't a gigue." So I said, I know. I'm going to call it Alex. That's a good name.
Okay.
So I called it Alex. And many years later, I met a young oboist at the Oberlin Conservatory, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, and his name was Alex Klein,
Mm.
and he ended up becoming one of our great oboe players. He was in the Chicago Symphony.
Wow.
And I wrote this one movement because I didn't know about how many movements, or should I write many movements, or I don't think I knew how to write variations. Nobody had suggested that to me. So I just wrote
Mm.
this little piece. Anyway, and it was it got published when I got published by Theodore Pressler, because it's a nice little piece, for God's sake.
Nice.
What's wrong? Sometimes your first pieces are okay.
Yeah.
So I just said, "Okay, I'm going to write a piece. Forget this study nonsense or whatever." And so that's what I did. And then when Alex came along, he said, "This is really sweet. You should write a bunch of more movements." So I did, and it became the Alex set. I like the name set because it sort of says, yeah, there's relationship and stuff going on, and it's a bunch of variations. And he recorded it. Thank thank God, or thank you, Alex. And that was very nice, and it's a nice piece. So there you have it. So that was the first piece I wrote when I got to Amherst.
So, what was it like to kind of revisit your first piece and expand on it?
Well, it was pretty weird. I mean, I rejected the idea out of hand. I said, "Alex, it's been 20 years or 15 years. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Yeah, I know. Okay, well, just think about it." And then, as usual, I thought about it. I mean, my wife says I drive her crazy because every time she says something, I say, "No, no, no, no. Forget that. Can't do that. That's not going to happen." And then I think about it and I say, "Oh, well, maybe that's okay."
That's the way it goes in marriage.
Don't say no. Just say, "Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll think about it." Your spouse will be much happier, or your partner. Anyway, so at some point I just did it.
Mm.
So I wrote a set of variations on it, and that's what happened.
Wow. And how
Yeah.
long ago was that you wrote those
Oh,
variations?
that's a long time ago. I must have been in
Okay.
my mid 40s. I
Yeah.
wrote the piece when I was 18, so I wrote it when I was maybe just getting to be 40. So 20 years
Right.
later, something like that.
So going back to college, so you wrote your first piece of music and you knew
mm,
you wanted to study composition.
yeah.
So did you kind of switch your major at school and continue studying that?
Ah, well, okay, I won't take a deep dive on Hampshire College, but Hampshire College was an experimenting institution, it was called. We didn't have majors. We had something called Division One, Division Two, and Division Three. And in Division One, you explore different modes of thinking. the humanities and arts, language and communications, the sciences, and the social sciences. And you could or didn't have to take courses. You could also just essentially do what the British do and read, right? And go and read in an area and learn and pick and do stuff. Well, I took some courses. I didn't take any theory courses right away. So what I did with Randall was I wrote music. I think I next wrote a choral piece called 19, since I was 19, something like that. I changed the name of it to Sign Sounds, or no, that's Earl Brown. I forget what it's called. It's called something, but and again, and then I sang in the chorus there, and the chorus sang it, and I still like the piece, and we recorded it with the BBC Singers a bunch of years ago. It's on an album called Purer Than Purest Pure, but it took off on what a chorus could do in the early 70s, having listened to, Pauline Oliveros and maybe Stockhausen and Vinko Globokar and or people who are dealing with sound from an electroacoustic standpoint. And I'd gotten into the electroacoustic music studio in Hampshire really early because we had a custom made Moog synthesizer. So I was already working with stuff there. And that was kind of cool to open myself up to that. And then I ended up studying also with a guy named Ron Pereira over at Smith College. You could do that.
Hmm.
And I took a conducting course with the woman who taught the chorus at Hampshire, and then with a wonderful woman named Iva D. Hyatt, who ran the choral program at Smith College. And she was all into early music stuff, like troubadour stuff and post troubadour stuff. So she'd give us assignments like, okay, here's what we have. We have this melody. How are we going to make music of it? What are we going to do with this? So I mean, everything was just getting going with the early music movement. So it was fascinating.
That sounds really, really fun,
Yeah,
actually.
it was very cool. And then Randall would give me scores to look at. He got a very thorough standard education at Eastman, but he was doing electroacoustic music and was into all this alternative stuff. So I'm sure that the very first semester, I mean, I don't know if your listeners, you have heard, I'm sure you have, you see by now, a woman named Meredith Monk. Well, Meredith came up when I was 18 to Hampshire College. My guess is that Meredith Monk was 23 and had just graduated from Sarah Lawrence College and was doing her thing down in the village and just getting going.
Hmm.
So I was hearing, can we swear on this show or not?
Yes, you can swear. That's fine.
Good. So she was doing her weird shit,
Yes.
but it was really interesting stuff. I never heard anything like that.
Right.
Never, never.
Hmm.
So then at the same time, I think I was probably starting to go hear the Smith Amherst Orchestra play concerts. And then soon I got back into trombone or conducting, and I started my own brass choir at Hampshire. With a bunch of guys, and I conducted and we played, and I think I also had a recorder group. Oh yeah, so I wrote a piece for 4 recorders, and it incorporated, and I was trying to write to figure that one out. So I wrote that, something like that.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's kind of my first and second year. I tried to write a piece. I studied the Holocaust in depth for a whole year.
Hmm.
And it was the first course in the Holocaust in the country. This was 1971. And
Really?
yeah, and Holocaust literature was just starting to be written.
Hmm.
And um, we got all of the scholars who had written or were writing all of the books on all of the major aspects of the Holocaust. So at Hampshire, if you took courses, you only took 3 courses. So they were all very much in depth. And this was for a whole year, which was also unheard of. But it was about about Europe, probably the 19th century, latter half of the 19th century, particularly on Germany, leading of the perpetrators and the victims. So all about the history and the culture of Germans and Jews. And then Raoul Hilberg, who wrote the first book on the destruction of European Jewry, came down from Vermont where he was teaching. So the destruction process itself, how it played out, and then the aftermath. What happened? What did it mean for religion? What did it mean? What did it mean for literature? What did it mean for the Jewish and German communities? What did it mean for artistic experience? What did it mean for philosophy? For this to have occurred. Anyway, that was a very important experience in my life. I tried to write a piece, a choral piece, somehow reflecting that, and I was too damn young. Come on. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't have the technique to do it. I didn't have the. I mean, there were some interesting ideas. I was looking at guys like Habenstock Ramadi. So the things I was writing for a voice, I was using his notational system, for example, and so I was incorporating things that it would have been great for the '70s, but it wouldn't have been very interesting. Let me put it that way. Anyway, and then I spent a year. I finished my first 3 years in essence in 2 years at Hampshire. I finished Division One and Division Two.
So you kind of had control of your own education in
I
that way.
did. I did. This
That's
was a
nice.
self-made education, you bet.
Yeah.
And so then I decided I'd go off to San Francisco for a year. And I did that, and I lived down by the water.
Can I ask why San Francisco?
I have no idea.
Hmm,
Absolutely no idea. I have no recollection. I thought it'd be fun to hang out in San Francisco for a year.
fair enough.
I really don't remember. Anyway, so I decided I would take courses at the San Francisco Conservatory
Okay.
because one of the things that I lacked was solfege.
Hmm.
So I took a class in solfege from a wonderful black woman named Dorothy Forrest, either Dorothy Forrest or Dorothy Parker at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were singing Donizetti and Puccini and on solfege syllables, and I got pretty good. And I took a theory course from a woman whose name now I can't remember, but it was a great theory course. And I decided I should listen to all of the symphonies of Joseph Haydn.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. Every day I'd go into the library and listen to another symphony of Joseph Haydn with a score. See how this guy wrote symphonies. And I studied conducting with a crazy man.
Crazy.
No, bona fide crazy. Um,
Oh,
but a tremendous conductor. I'll let you look for it. He conducted the orchestra at the conservatory and the San Jose Symphony. And I'm blanking on his name. He was the assistant conductor under Seiji Ozawa in Toronto.
okay.
And he got thrown out because he slugged somebody in the orchestra. And one thing that's not good for a conductor's career is to hit somebody in an orchestra.
No, it can't be.
You do that, baby, you get blackballed real fast.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he was an extraordinary conductor. George Cleave, that's his name. All you guys should look up George Cleave and listen to some of his recordings of Mozart in particular. Genius, one of those geniuses, but a little nutty.
Right.
And I thought that I might study composition while I was there. And there was a young squirt there who was teaching composition. And his name was John Adams.
Hmm.
And I went to my first class with John and I showed him what I was working on. And he said, "Oh, this is not very interesting. This is rip off George Crumb," which it was, because I liked George Crumb a lot. I'd listened to a lot. Randall had introduced me. George was just coming on the scene then.
Hmm.
Okay, it meant this is early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he won the Pulitzer 3 years earlier, or something like that. If your listeners have not heard of the music of George Crumb, they should go listen to it. And George Rockberg, right? And Richard Wernick, the three guys who made up the Philadelphia School. And very different composers. Anyway, so my response to that was, screw you. You know, I'm sorry. I didn't come here to get blasted out. So I didn't work with him for the year. And then I had an oboist at the end of the year play Alex. And he came up to me afterwards and said, "Gee, that's such a sweet piece. I'm sorry you didn't study with me." And I thought to myself, well, if you hadn't been such an asshole, maybe we would have had a good time together. But I wasn't going to put up with your nonsense. But I was a young guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went back to Hampshire College that year. Although in between, I went and spent a year the summer in Israel,
Hmm.
studying on living on a kibbutz there for about 6 weeks of study or so.
What's a kibbutz?
Oh, a kibbutz is a communal living settlement. They used to be all agricultural.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
when the first Jews came to build up the Yishuv, which was the budding growth of the extension of the Jewish community in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
many of them came from the Soviet Union, and they were all socialists. So they wanted to live like had been created in the Soviet Union in collective farms and
Hmm.
work the land. And then I stopped and visited a friend in the south of Paris, a little south called the Coste, and I worked on the piece there. And it was a nice piece, kind of Webern-esque, lots of tintinnabulation. It was very pretty, and I lost the piece. I have no idea what happened to the piece.
Really?
Yeah, no idea, no idea, and I'm sorry about
Yeah.
it. To this very day, when I had to write it on vellum. Think anybody knows what vellum is?
I don't know what vellum
You don't
is.
know what vellum is.
Oh.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. Let me initiate you into how composers wrote music. Vellum essentially is a modern version of calfskin, right? But it's something that you would write music on.
Hmm.
And the way I did it was you had to make your own staves,
Okay.
and then you'd write your music on those staves. And if you made a mistake in ink, you had to have an electric eraser and erase it.
Jeez.
So that's how we all wrote our music before you guys got computers. Don't forget, it was all handwritten. Mozart and Beethoven and Mahler were all writing it by hand and then giving it to somebody to do it on their paper and not make mistakes. Unless you were really good, it didn't look very good. I mean, we learned how to do it. We had rapidographs, very fancy pens,
Hmm.
and you had to, work with your ruler to get every line straight. And sometimes you write everything first in blue pencil so you know exactly what the spacing was going to be. I'm sounding like a real old fart here, but this is how it was done.
It's good information.
Yeah, this is how we wrote music.
Yeah.
Anyway, um, so I came back to Hampshire College for my last year,
Hmm.
and I wrote a big piece called On the Surface. And On the Surface, it was my thesis piece. And I wrote it with a guy named Stephen Albert because Ron Pereira was on sabbatical. And Stephen was in his young, early 30s. He won a Pulitzer Prize, by the way, in the 80s, 10 years or so later. Great composer, tremendous energy. You folks out there should listen to his pieces, River Run, that's his symphony for which he wrote a Pulitzer Prize, and To Wake the Dead. Those are the most, I think, important pieces. Other ones are marvelous, but those are pieces to start with. Remember, this is the late '60s and '70s when dodecaphonic music reigned, when Babbitt and the Columbia Princeton School were in the ascendancy or at the very top of their game and control. So when Rockberg broke with them and said, can't do this anymore, I got to do something else, and began his experiments in recovering history. Stephen Albert was one of his students who was there, who was already there philosophically and emotionally. So those are the two pieces of Stevens to listen to. Anyway, but Stephen was interesting. And Stephen, I don't really want to see your music. Let's just study scores together. So we did. I studied Bartok's string quartets with him. I studied George Crumb's uh, first book of Macrocosmos, which to this day I still think is an extraordinary work and one of his very best. If you don't know these guys, go check it out. And so I wrote this piece called "On the Surface" for oboe, harp, electric cello,
Hmm.
and two percussion. And it ended up being about a 25-minute piece. I'd never written anything that long in my life. It has a singer, one movement, mostly just the singer and percussion playing stereophonically, and the singer uses a cup as a mute,
That's very cool.
and it's amplified, and she has to whistle and do all that stuff that George had opened up for us. And then the last movement is a blues. What appears on the surface to be an in-house departmental controversy based on just the stupidest thing that had been printed in the University of Massachusetts Amherst newspaper. It was all about woke politics. So for those of you who know about woke politics, it started back here in the '70s, and I was already onto it in the early '70s. Anyway, and then there are movements that are purely instrumental, which were what I was thinking then. And who are we as composers, you might ask? Well, I think we're the combination of everything we've encountered in our lives, and every piece of music we've encountered somehow filters into our musical persona, and we decide, yeah, I like that, or no, I don't like that so much, or yeah, I think I can include that.
Yeah.
So that was all in this piece. A lot of different things were blending into the Asia persona.
I love that. It sounds like the 70s was a very exciting time, honestly, to study music. It mixed with your education and the way that it worked. Sounds like it sparked a lot of creativity.
Well, it was to have heard somebody like Meredith
Yeah.
Monk and say, "Okay, that's hip, but I don't think I want to do that." And then I went to various composer gatherings of young composers. I remember in New York, and there were people from SUNY at Buffalo who were there with Feldman, and people with various schools in New York, whether it was Juilliard or Mannes or Manhattan. So yeah, it was interesting to hear. It was wide open aesthetically. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
In a way that I think, yeah, it was kind of healthy. Produced a lot of really bad music, but guess what, folks? Every period produces lots of really bad music. That's just the name of the
Yeah.
game. This is a tough profession. It's a really tough profession.
I mean, every individual composer probably produces a lot of bad music too. Just part of that.
Well, that's
Yeah.
right. We just do. That's part of who we are. Although, I mean, the great ones didn't, but there aren't that many of the greatest, and we all do the best we can. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, definitely. So so after you finished studying, did you know that you wanted to work as a composer, or what was your kind of vision for your career path?
So at the end of my last year of Hampshire, I was also the assistant conductor of the Smith Amherst Orchestra. So I kept doing both conducting and composition. I knew I wanted to do both.
Mm,
So I went off from Hampshire College to the Yale School of Music. And I had no idea. I'd gotten in there in the University of California, San Diego. And I'd studied with a couple of, or new Yale composers who were in the Connecticut Valley, who were at Amherst.
mm-hmm.
And they said, well, if you think you might want to teach sometime, it might be better to go to Yale than to UCSD. Because UCSD is a pretty brand new program. And I'll get back to UCSD later because there's a good story about that. Anyway, so I ended up going to Yale where I studied with three guys. The most important was Jacob Druckmann in composition. So if your people don't know of Jacob Druckmann, they should listen to him. One of the most important composers of the last 50 years or so. At the time of the last celebration of the Declaration of Independence, or the big one in
Mm-hmm.
1975, he received, I think, four major commissions from the major orchestras in the country at the same
Wow.
time. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good
Dream of that.
luck. Yeah, you dream of that. Anyway, so I studied composition with him for a year, and I studied conducting with a guy named Arthur Weisberg. He ended up recording a large number of recordings of American composers for Non Such Records, which was then an upstart label. And it made the careers of many of those composers. And Arthur was quiet, rather contained. Jacob was also somewhat contained. If you don't know Jacob's music, you should listen to some pieces. He too won a Pulitzer Prize. Um, he won a Pulitzer Prize for a piece called Windows. I don't think it's the greatest piece. I think you might want to listen to a piece called Sudden Lightning. It's the last piece he wrote. And it's where he says, he sort of got back to where he'd started. Because I think he got lost a little bit in the middle. And you might want to listen to a seminal piece that Arthur recorded called In Centers, just as it sounds. In Centers,
Mm-hmm.
one word. Those are two great pieces to listen to get an idea. And look at the scores, obviously, with them. And Arthur ended up then also conducting an orchestra in New York called the Orchestra of Her Time, where he did major works in the 70s, like Barrios Sinfonia, Pli Salon Pli of Boulez, etc. So, major conductor of contemporary music. He started off a bassoon player when he was about 18 in the New York Philharmonic. And then he played, I think, in Philadelphia and in Cleveland. And by the time he was 26, he was bored. He said, I'm playing the same stuff over and over again. I'm like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So he learned how to conduct. And he learned how to conduct by conducting composers' music and said, yeah, this is for me. I like it.
So you're studying with Jacob, was that it?
That's it. Jacob Druckmann.
And at Yale. And you're studying conducting, but still composing as well?
Doing both. And the pieces I wrote there were pieces that became part of my oeuvre. I never wrote studies or sketch. I just wrote pieces. I wrote a piece called Dream Sequence One for a trombonist that I met there, which I think is a piece worth hearing. I wrote a piece for well, the lead flute player of my generation, Robert Dick, who was just beginning his career and writing his book, The Other Flute, which is the seminal text for composers on how to write extended techniques for the flute. I wrote him Plum Dream Sequence 2 called Plum DS2. I wrote my first string quartet, which won some prize. I can't remember what prize, but and very much influenced by lots of composers, Penderecki, but electroacoustic music. I mentioned Mozart earlier on, and what did the announcers say? Yeah, these are written under the influence of Haydn.
Mm.
Okay, but they're Mozart. They're Mozart. I don't care if they're under the influence or not.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and then I wrote a big piece called the Piano Set. Oh, Piano Set Two. Back at Hampshire, I'd written a piece called Piano Set One that I wrote for a friend of mine there. He played it beautifully. And then I wrote Piano Set Two for two pianos, which is more of um, a post Barrio piece of having been in the studio and mixing styles and having been influenced by cutting and splicing in the recording studio. And then finally, I worked on a piece called Sand 2. And that I think, and then a bunch of electroacoustic pieces. Miles Mix, which people can listen to. It's recorded in a piece called Stay. That's a nice kind of studio phrase, isn't it? I mean, something backwards. Anyway, so it was a productive time for me. I mean, I just set out to write music and to study conducting. I took as few courses as I could. I didn't I didn't do much theory. Wrote my music, worked with Arthur. Um, didn't listen too much to the composers there, the other guys, because they were still into heavy serial stuff. A guy named Robert Morris, but I learned a lot in the studio from Robert, and I studied a little bit with Christoph Penderecki. He came in, but nobody really studied with Christoph. He was too famous. He came in and did his European master routine and talked for an hour and then went home. Uh, uh, he listened to Miles Mix and go listen to Miles Mix, everybody. So it starts off with 5 minutes of heavy metal, really loud stuff, crash bang, youthful stuff, right? And then 6 or 7 minutes of just soft, gentle, dreamy stuff. The metaphor was, imagine a diver off a big cliff in Mexico, and he dives off and he accelerates and accelerates and accelerates, and then baby, he hits the water, and what happens? Right? It's just sudden peace, bliss of being in the water, and it lasts forever. And Christoph said, uh, I like the last part. I don't like the first part. And I said, well, yeah, but it kind of goes together. Composers and young composers have to know when to say, no, I know what I'm trying to do. I know what I've done. You're not ready for this
Mm.
piece yet. But I have people who are ready for this, who are ready to listen to this. That's what I think. It was like Meredith Monk closing her ears when she was at Sarah Lawrence so she wouldn't have to listen to the music she didn't want to listen to. Now that's a little bit over the top to me. I'm willing to listen to most stuff, but I'm willing to say this is bullshit or this is good stuff,
Yeah.
right? In other words, that's another thing I'm going to say, particularly for young listeners. Sorry to say this, but you have to be willing to make judgment. That's part of who we are as composers. It, does it work or doesn't it? Every time you're choosing a note, you're choosing, I hope, the best note you can choose and the best rhythm, and we all do the best we
Yeah.
can at that. And to criticize or to pass judgment is to say, no, no, I think I can do better. I mean, why did Beethoven write over, those 32 sonatas? He could have stopped at 12 as far as everybody's concerned, and they would have said, these are all great. But he must have said, no, no, I can get better. I can do more.
Yeah. I like
There
that.
you,
It's
there, there
very
you
good
go.
points. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Stay tuned for the second half of my interview with Daniel, where he goes into advice he has for young and beginning composers. Also, make sure to sign up for our newsletter, The Composer's Studio, for a more behind the scenes look at composing, including a monthly newsletter that has opportunities, news for the music industry, and more. See you in the next one.